Champions. I'm Mark Cockrell with here my compadres as always, Colin Cronin and Brian O'Leary. And as you know, when it gets to the playoffs, it's Irish NFL on tour. Last week was Santa Clara. A couple of weeks' time, the boys are going to be in Arizona. But tonight, we're back live in Dublin. And we're joined here live in the Pointsbet offices in Dublin 8. Pointsbet have been a great partner and supporter of the show all season long. And big thanks to the whole team here to have a live show with them. We talked about PointsBet a little bit during the year, guys, but I mean, interestingly for the audience, just to emphasize again, if you are interested in the great CX roles, great technical and engineering roles, check them out on www, there's three of them, pointsbet.ie, and you can find out more details, and we'll talk more about them as well. Colin, want to bring you in. It's great to see you live and in person again instead of at home. And look, you don't have a ridiculous shirt on. Miracles do happen.
You're wearing grey. Is this your effort to make up for switching allegiance last week? I'm just surprised we don't see you in a Bill Belichick-esque hoodie, Mark. But great to be here. I think for me, Championship Weekend is the best weekend of the year in the NFL. It is unlike anything else in American sports. When you go to the NBA or the NHL, you're talking about best of 7. When you're talking about the Champions League, it is over 2 legs. This is all about one game. Fans get to go along, and winner gets to go to the Super Bowl. The best weekend in the NFL season for me.
Well, Brian, it's going to surely be better for you because divisional weekend saw the end for your Giants, of course. But now, of course, it enables you to channel your inner Philadelphia Eagle fan. I'm sure that's just bursting to come out.
Absolutely not, Mark. No, certainly be cheering on the San Francisco 49ers this weekend. Look, it's a great, as Colin was alluded to, it is arguably the best weekend of the NFL season, and I think it's fair to say that the best 4 teams consistently throughout the course of the season are in the championship games this weekend, which makes it so difficult to call. We've got two really enticing games. Even if you look at the PointsBet odds during the week, for example, you can see it's flip-flopped in terms of the Bengals-Chiefs game. No one really knows who's going to be favourite come Sunday, and it's not too dissimilar to the other game in terms of the 49ers going in there against the Eagles, 2 teams that have been on an incredible run. It makes for a great weekend.
Absolutely, Brian. And you mentioned the 49ers have been a great run. The Bengals have been on a great run, great winning run. And we're going to break down all of the NFC and the AFC games very shortly. Of course, great part of the partnership with PointsBet is we're going to be joined by a couple of their key ambassadors. We've got an interview with Mike Renner, the column did earlier in the week with Mike. And also we're going to be joined live by Ryan Leaf this evening, talking to him a bit about his partnership and the straight line the show he's been doing all season long, and obviously his thoughts on the key games and all the storylines coming up in the NFL as always. We're also going to hear from Stephen Quigley, Brian, to your point, talking a little bit about those lines and how the betting market's evolving, especially in light of that critical injury to Patrick Mahomes and how that might transpire to affect the game overall. But gents, I think we should get straight into it. So let's start with the NFC. I was, yes, rightly, Colin mentioned in Santa Clara last weekend, and I was wearing a San Francisco 49ers jersey just to fit in. That's all it was, guys. It was just to fit in. But very delighted to see a really passionate home playoff game and a home playoff win for the 49ers. Led, and I only learned this in Santa Clara, guys, by BCB. You want to guess what BCB stands for?
I'm intrigued, Mark.
BCB apparently stands for Big Cock Brock. Brock Purdy is what he is known as out there in Santa Clara. So the 262nd pick of the draft, Mr. Irrelevant Brock Purdy, did overcome the Dallas Cowboys, and now obviously they're going into fun and games in Philly with the Philadelphia Eagles. Colin, want to give us your thoughts on this game and especially a bit of a breakdown on the teams?
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic game. I suppose have described NFL in the past as chess meets demolition derby, and I think this game absolutely encapsulates that. If you are a football fan, you will enjoy that because this is going to be trench warfare. This is going to be some of the best players on offensive line going up against some of the best defensive line guys you have out there. And it will be fascinating to see who comes out on top. You're talking about Trent Williams, Lane Johnson, Nick Bosa, Hassan Reddick. There are so many options on both sides. I think that is what I am going to be keen to watch. If you're not a particularly big football fan, there's still going to be plenty of excitement. There's still going to be plenty of big hits. But this game is really, really tough to call. You have Brock Purdy is the big story that you've talked about. To me, it feels a little bit like as we've gone through the playoffs, it's gotten tougher and tougher. He's gotten them over it. Kyle Shanahan has, he's such a brilliant offensive mind. And he has been able to kind of shepherd him along, but he's going into Philly. We know how raucous it's going to be. Hassan Reddick has a point to prove. You've seen him talk this week about he feels maybe got snubbed a little bit on the Defensive Player of the Year. He should have been in contention. He feels he's got a point to prove. A Philly with a point to prove. Brock Purdy could end up running for his life a little bit, I think, in this game. But equally on the Niners side, so much to look forward to there as well.
Yeah, I was going to say Levi's got loud last weekend, especially when Brent Maher came out for any single kick in the entire game. But Lincoln Field this weekend is going to be something different. Brian, Colin kind of alludes to it. The trench warfare here. The Philly offensive line has been superb. They've actually supported 35 rushing TDs this season. They're 2 away from the all-time record set down by the 62 Packers for a season. And it's a multi-headed beast. There's Gainwell, there's Scott, there of course is Jalen Hurts, who can run from the quarterback position. But equally, if we flip to the D-line, they've had 4 players with over 10 sacks. Again, an NFL record. And I think we called it out earlier in the season. Credit to Peyton Manning when he had that offensive season with 4 wide receivers with 10-plus touchdowns. 10-plus sacks for 4 different players. Unheard of, Brian. I mean, are they just this magical beast on both sides of the line?
It's a
you have to say nice things about Philly now, Brian. This is all coming up.
Well, it's a fantastic story in terms of the contribution across the board. They've had 70 sacks this season, 16 from Reddick, and then 11 from the other 3 guys. It is unheard of. You look at what the 49ers, they've had 40, and equally in any season, 40 is a significant number. Bosa's had 18.5 sacks, so he's the main contributor. He's literally 50% of the sacks, where with the Eagles, it's spread across the line. And not just the focus is predominantly around the front 7, but equally you look at secondary, which was a question mark going into the season in terms of how good that would be. And you've got Slay, you've got Gardner Johnson, a trade leading into the season with the Saints, and look at the player he's become. You saw on the commentary last week their question, how could the Saints allow him to walk out the door? He's such a great player. And then they bring in Bradbury. Essentially, we've seen this team gradually over the course of 3 years, and it's the model that a lot of teams are aspiring to get to. The Eagles have gradually put a team together. Question marks throughout the course of the last 2 years, whether Hurts is the quarterback. Even last year with all the draft picks, there was question whether he would be the quarterback in the future. I think that's been put to bed to now. It's a fantastic story for them. But yeah, some people still aren't happy. AJ Brown's not happy. Came out this week and he criticised the coaching around how many receptions he got last weekend. They went 38-7. They're coming off a bye. They've had the week off. Everybody's fully fit. And yeah, the marquee wide receiver that was brought in last year is still not happy with the contribution. Maybe that's a good sign. Maybe the Titans knew what they were doing. It'd be interesting to see how he holds up on Sunday in a critical game at this time of the season.
Yeah. I mean, look, when it comes to these championship games, and you called it, Brian, it's between the 4 best teams of the entire season now. The margins are so razor thin. And we're talking about the lines, but even if we took the Flash boys, the skill players in this, Philly are lining up, Colin, AJ Brown, disgruntled as he may be, Brian, Devontae Smith, and then in the center of the field, like Dallas Goedert, probably one of the premier tight ends of the game. But if I flip it to the 49ers, well, we got Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel. They could be in the backfield, they could be receiving, they could be all over the place. Yeah, Elijah Mitchell will run the ball hard, and of course George Kittle, who some people say is the premier tight end in the game today. I mean, it's a subjective viewpoint. What do you think, Colin, as to the key matters here where the game's going to be won or lost, and especially really around those skill positions? Are they going to have the opportunity to exploit weaknesses in the other?
Yeah, I think it's actually a good thing in terms of AJ Brown being disgruntled. I look at number 1 wide receivers. We know the history of them. Go back, T.O., Randy Moss. They always had a chip on their shoulder. That's the way you want them to be. And I think if you're an Eagles fan, or you're looking at where the Eagles can exploit, it is in the 49ers secondary on those deep balls. The issue is, can Jalen Hurts get enough time in order to throw deep? But if he can, Smith and AJ Brown can both take advantage of that. For the Niners, it is about that ability to line up in different ways. So as you said, like they can, with the guys that they have, you can line up Christian McCaffrey just about anywhere. You can line Debo up. So you set your personnel out, and all of a sudden the ball is snapped and the guys are elsewhere. It's very difficult for a defense to deal with that. The other thing to keep an eye on is one of the areas where the Eagles have struggled is with pass catching backs. They are facing possibly the team who does that the best. So that is something to definitely keep an eye on, because McCaffrey out of the backfield is absolutely phenomenal. Equally, Debo as a pass catcher out of the backfield, you can utilize him in that way. And Januzaj, I mean, the fullback doesn't get a whole lot of love, doesn't get talked about enough, but my goodness, he can catch a ball and can he block. So there are, I think, weaknesses that they can exploit, but you've got coordinators on both sides. DeMeco Ryans is probably the hottest name coordinator in the entirety of the league right now, and so he is going to be scheming. But on the Eagles side, you've got two really talented coordinators there. They're going to be scheming and trying to come up with ways to slow Kyle Shanahan's offense down.
And Brian, kind of the same to you. I know for Cowboys fans this weekend, this is like a fate worse than hell. Like the Eagles or the 49ers are going to the Super Bowl. You're not the biggest Eagles fan, but I mean, there are very limited weaknesses really in these teams, except for some of those that Colin outlines.
Well, Colin alluded, but towards, I suppose, maybe the first half of the season, their run defense was exploited time and time again. Colin's called that like it's not just McCaffrey, like there's Mitchell there in the back, in the backfield. We saw what he did in the fourth quarter last week. McCaffrey wasn't having the greatest of the game. Okay, we'll move away from him. We'll put him into passing situations, and we'll go with the other running backs. And Debo Samuel obviously is another X factor there. He has some years number. I think he's in the region 270 yards for the season rushing, so they can exploit him with that. So there's just so many flaws. But if it gets into a situation where they are methodically running the ball, and Purdy, the one thing about him, he's been so effective is he's having these great methodical drives, few mistakes, taking a lot of time off the clock. He's 14 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Like he's done essentially what's been asked of him with the players around. And another thing at times where we've seen, obviously, it hasn't been that often. When they do get exploited, it's more about the yards after catch. So we've seen quarterbacks with immediate throws out, get it out quickly so that defensive line doesn't get the Purdy. And then you're relying on Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Kittle to get the yards after the catch. And when the 49ers have done that effectively throughout the course of the season, his numbers in those 7 games in which he's won have shot up. And we have seen teams do that in the Eagles at times. So there is opportunities there. It's just a case whether they can do it consistently for 4 quarters on Sunday.
Yeah, and you call out Brendan Ayuk, who we didn't even give a call out to until you just did, who's been a very strong, bright spot for them at the wide receiver position. These teams don't meet in the playoffs very often. They've only met once in history, actually, in 1996, where the 49ers were victorious, 14-zip. I would be slightly surprised if that's a similar scoreline this weekend. I suppose the joy of being here with a live audience as well is to throw out the opportunity for them to pose any questions, whether it's about the game, the teams involved, or just generally in relation to life itself and what is the meaning of the universe. So we've just got a mic out there and we'll go around. If anybody's got a question from the floor, we'll just get you mic'd up and we'll just throw that into the mix as well. Yeah, the joys of live TV.
Hi guys. If San Francisco win on Sunday, who is the starting quarterback for San Francisco next season? Is it going to be BCB, as you say, or is it going to be Trey Lance, who they spent all that kind of draft capital on to acquire?
Fantastic question, and one I'm going to ask Brian for his thoughts on.
Brock Purdy will be the quarterback, win lose on Sunday, and I imagine, bearing in mind that the GM of the Titans, who recently took over, has come from the San Francisco background, and imagine he has a relationship already in place with Trey Lance. I'd be surprised if Trey Lance isn't traded in the offseason, and I think Titans will be one of the front runners. Not to get into a Titans conversation, but it looks like they're not happy with their quarterback. Brock Purdy, I think, has done enough now to convince everybody he should be the starting quarterback next season.
So he's not only answered your question, but he's given Ryan Tannehill the unemployment papers at the same time. We'll just go around on this. Colin, what do you think on that?
I think Brock Purdy has done a fantastic job, and obviously you get nominated for Offensive Rookie of the Year after 6 games. It's impressive, but I think Kyle Shanahan has a huge amount to do with that. I'm not sold on Brock Purdy completely. I think you have seen the way in which Shanahan has looked to scheme for him over the past couple of games against the Seahawks. He had a really bad start. Like, he plays the game at 100 miles an hour. Everything is super fast. Everything is super aggressive all the time. He doesn't know how to take his foot off the accelerator. To me, I think a lot of this is down to Kyle Shanahan. I think Kyle Shanahan wants, or, Kyle Shanahan is constantly looking to evolve offense. Right, I think that is makes him, for me, the greatest offensive mind. I think head coach wise, I sometimes question his time management and things like that. But offensively, he's constantly scheming more so than even Sean McVay. I think he wants to take quarterbacking to the next level. I think that's why they went out and they got Trey Lance. I would not be surprised. I don't think he's ready to give up on Trey Lance. I think there'll probably be a QB competition in the summer there. I think that's what might happen.
I actually think it's going to be Jimmy Garoppolo.
We have had this scenario before, Mark, where a team has taken in a quarterback towards the back end of the season, gone on to win the Super Bowl, and they've gone back to the other quarterback. Can you remember who it was?
Yes, I can. Nick Foles and the Philadelphia.
No, actually, no.
Oh, I thought he was going to get the page.
No, I have to talk about my Giants. Jeff Hostetler and Phil Simms.
Oh, yeah, 1990. Yeah, 1990. That's true.
Yeah,
that's
so
true.
It could happen. They could go back to Trey Lance.
I mean, a bad team. Seriously though, I mean, I actually think it's a Purdy Lance competition, like Colin. But who do you think?
The thought it's probably has to be kind of Lance, just how much has been invested in terms of draft capital. Like, you give it 3 first-round picks effectively. I think you have to give Lance the pick, and there's always seems to be this kind of view that a player shouldn't lose a spot over an injury in the NFL. I've never fully understood it, but you've always kind of heard that kind of discussion.
Yeah. Drew Bledsoe likes to bring that up from time to time.
They could say, that's a great point around what was leveraged to get up in the draft to get him. They could get a lot of it back very quickly if they do make a trade to send him out to whoever.
To the Titans, who are now firing their starting quarterback, going into Brian. So it's a good move in the relation to that. If we're nothing else from the floor in this segment, we'll be coming back on the AFC game. We're coming back, obviously, when we have Ryan Leaf live. We're going to move on from the NFC Championship breakdown. We'll give our picks towards the end of the game. We'll see what the mood in the room is in relation to who everyone here thinks is going to win as well. But we're going to break for a segment now where the benefit or the advantage or the joy, that's the word I'm looking for. Colin had the joy of interviewing Mike Remmer earlier on this week, who is indeed a Pointsbet ambassador, but very interestingly from an Irish angle is also a Notre Dame alum. So very interesting with the Notre Dame and Navy game coming up, or Notre Dame and Navy game coming up later on this year. So we're going to break now to bring in that segment from Mike Remmer, and we'll be back after this with the AFC Championship game breakdown.
So welcome everyone to an Irish NFL show special in partnership with Pointsbet. You can check out all of Pointsbet's tech employment opportunity at www.pointsbet.ie. And I am delighted to welcome our next guest. We have talked to some of his colleagues from PFF in the past, but delighted to welcome the PFF lead draft analyst, Mike Renner, to the show. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. And I don't know how many people know that PFF actually started on that side of the pond. PFF was originally a British born out company.
Yeah, indeed. We had the chat with Sam, but it is good to point it out because probably a lot of people aren't aware of it, and I think maybe a nice kind of tie-in with Pointsbet and their offices here in Dublin. And I suppose speaking of Dublin and all things Ireland, you are a Notre Dame alum. And obviously, it's kind of quite an exciting time here because we have Notre Dame coming back to these shores in just a few months to take on Navy. And I was at the game in 2012 when it happened. I've been to South Bend myself and felt the atmosphere there. As for you, I suppose, as somebody who has been there, maybe two-parter potentially. Like, how aware were you of the Irish heritage when you were studying, and how important do you think it will be to the community in Notre Dame to see them come here? And also, given your role as draft analyst, Colorado is the one that everyone's talking about because of Coach Prime. But where in Notre Dame do you think going in to the next college season?
Yeah, so at Notre Dame, I mean, everyone loves, the Irish connection. Like it's pretty pervasive throughout campus. There's a ton of Irish Catholic students there, obviously, and I personally would love. I know they've had multiple games now over there. I'd love to get to one sometime. Now, obviously, my job permitting doesn't always give me the most flexible of hours, but I will make it over there at some point for one of those games. So very excited about that. And Notre Dame next year, I mean, they got the team trending the right way. I think Marcus Freeman, after that slow start, really put his foot, on the gas and said, "I'm here. I'm a real NCAA college coach. I'm a high-end coach." And Tommy Rees did as well, their offense coordinator. And they brought in one heck of a recruiting class and got a lot of guys who could have declared for the draft to come back. And Sam Hartman had transferred from Wake Forest. So I think you're going to see a team that's competing for, at very least, a playoff spot, if not a real deal shot at a national championship.
Well, given what happened the last time they were here in 2012 and the kind of magical season that turned out to be, maybe it'll be the luck of the Irish again. But I suppose turning our attention to the top of the draft, and obviously we could probably have a whole episode of the Irish NFL show discussing the way in which the Bears ended up with the number 1 overall pick. But there they are. They have $100 million or thereabouts to spend in free agency. And obviously they have Justin Fields. But for them, I mean, given what we've seen with the importance of a QB on potentially a rookie deal and what that allows you to do, for the Bears, Mike, is it a question that they're definitely going to stick with Justin Fields and build around him and actually give him the opportunity to put maybe a line in place so he's not always running for his life and give him weapons? Or is there any possibility that they might decide, you know what, Justin, has done well, but we could maybe move on from him in a Cardinals Josh Rosen type scenario?
I think that is a real conversation going on inside Hallis Hall. Now, are they going to really man up and pull the trigger on something as, I guess, something as like that we have not seen before? In that, right? This would be even crazier than the Josh Rosen, and that Justin Fields has actually played well, in his 2 years at quarterback, whereas Rosen was not. It'd be really unprecedented if they did make a move like this. But I do think, like you mentioned there, the biggest thing in that decision, though, is still the rookie contract. If Justin Fields turns out to be good, all of a sudden you have to pay him the very next year to be good. Whereas if Bryce Young hits the ground running, turns out to be good, turns out to be the prospect that a lot of people think he is, which is this blue chip, I don't want to say can't miss, but he's going to be a high-end NFL starter type of prospect. If you really think that, if you're Ryan Poles as the GM, and you have 4 years of that guy in the rookie deal with the amount of cap space that they have, that's a path to a Super Bowl very quickly. Whereas the Justin Fields route, he better make immense strides as a passer. And then even if he does, again, like I said, you have to pay him real quick. So it's a debate, but I do think that the lottery ticket that they're holding, the fact that it's the number 1 overall pick, and that you have this situation in the AFC South where the Colts are at number 4, but the Texans are at number 2. So if the Colts don't make a move up, they're basically giving a quarterback to the Texans in this, to where I think a deal is going to get done by draft day that I think we'll see the Colts drafting a 1 overall.
So, yeah, that will be interesting. The Bears, obviously, with money and potentially draft picks for the future, depending on what might happen. But in terms of QBs and the draft, if we talk about Trevor Lawrence, because there's the guy who went number 1 overall, generational talent. I mean, we were aware, people over here, and not even, people super into football, but he was transcendental in the college game. And then he comes in and obviously has that, Urban Meyer as his head coach for some of his first season, and a lot of disappointment, I think, in terms of the way in which it played out. And then he starts his second season under Doug Peterson, and he's up and down a bit. And then Justin Simmons intercepts him in London, and all of a sudden it was like the flick of a switch. He suddenly went on a run. He was one of the most impressive QBs in the back end of the season, and obviously even into the playoffs. For you as somebody who watches QBs kind of come through and get drafted, was that all just down to the head coach, or what are some of the factors that led to Trevor Lawrence being able to take that jump, Mike?
Yeah, I think he's one of the best case studies for situation and how much that matters to success in the NFL, and especially at quarterback, or obviously at quarterback, because he goes from, one of the worst schemes that we've seen in recent years, a collection of wide receivers that had no number one, no real even number two in that wide receiving core last year, to now, a bevy of wide receivers after they brought in Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk. They brought in a bunch of guys, and then a real head coach, head coach who knows how to scheme NFL offense, and Doug Peterson. So I do think you saw that distinct difference in his performance, and it really happened, the switch or whatever turned down the second half of the year, where he was the second highest graded quarterback according to our grades here at PFF since week 9. So he definitely has arrived, and definitely shown the world that, hey, if you put the pieces around me, you continue to do that, you're obviously going to get Calvin Ridley next year. You give me those pieces, I can probably get you a championship, and that's where he's at right now.
Yeah, it will be fascinating to see how year 3 goes. I suppose two of the teams who maybe surprised and overperformed were the Seahawks and the Giants. I mean, look at the way the season turned out for the Seahawks. Their draft pick turned out pretty well. They didn't have to pay Russ. For the Giants, I think safe to say Brian Dable eked out almost every bit of talent from that roster. But those teams are now faced, I suppose, with a decision around their QBs. In terms of Geno Smith and Daniel Jones and what they do and what's a fair price. And you don't, obviously, after a good season, there is the temptation to get it done. But from your perspective, should they both agree to it, or should one of them look to maybe test the free agency or the draft, or what's a fair price given what we saw from Geno and from Daniel Jones this year?
Yeah, I think the Seahawks are the one who are in a much better position here, because you have the leverage of saying, hey, if you're not going to take this deal, we can tag you, we can trade you, and we can draft a quarterback with the 5th overall pick. They have that draft capital. They got very lucky with that Denver Broncos trade for them to be sitting there with a position to still draft a quarterback in a strong quarterback class, in my opinion. So I think they have leverage there to say, hey, Geno, here's the offer, take it, or we're going to ship you out for some draft picks and draft one on ourselves. Whereas the Giants, they don't have the luxury of being towards the top of the draft to get that quarterback in free agency. And I also don't think that Daniel Jones really has as big of a market to someone else as they would to the New York Giants. So I do think from that perspective, the Giants really have to go kind of all in on Daniel Jones, because if you're going to go out and say to the open market, trade for a Derek Carr, trade for an Aaron Rodgers, or go sign a Tom Brady, something like that, those guys are going to say no. This receiving core still has so long to go, and I'm not sure you can do it with this free agent class, with this draft class, to fix it overnight. That I don't think anyone's going to want to walk into that situation. So I think Daniel Jones has a lot of leverage there to basically say, hey, I've shown you I can do this. This was a top 10 offense in EPA per play with me at the helm. So pay me, or else, you guys are going to be sitting there with no one at the quarterback position next season.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see if it gets done, or could he potentially do a Brock Osweiler. So, but look,
never do a Brock Osweiler.
that would be quite. I mean, I think there's maybe a PhD thesis in Brock's career and the way in which it ebbed and flowed, and what played out. But look, the QBs are what we all talk about. And I think that the NFC Championship game is an interesting case study, because we're going to see Jalen Hurts, who was a 2nd-round pick. Lots of questions from some people when he initially kind of came in and consistently, but he's in his 2 years as starter, he's gone to the playoffs. And obviously Brock Purdy comes in, the final pick in the draft, QB3, and is playing really well. In terms of maybe kind of building on what we've been talking about, Mike, if Purdy and the 49ers or Hurts were to go on to win it, could it lead to a reevaluation a little bit amongst the league in terms of you don't have to have a top 10 pick? Of course, on the other side, you obviously have Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow. So it's slightly different. Is it even, does it come down to the conferences? Does it obviously come down to who you have as head coach?
I do think we're going to see that become a trend. At some point, someone's going to say, hey, whether it's someone like those mid-tier of quarterbacks that are still getting paid like high-end quarterbacks, the Ryan Tannehills of the world. I'd even throw maybe a Kirk Cousins into there, where it's like, hey, the $40 million that those guys are getting paid against our cap, we can go get a Devonta Adams and an Amari Cooper for that $40 million. And we could probably force a rookie, and not necessarily a rookie, but like a guy on his rookie deal to play very good football when your weapons are open all the time. When you have the guys who can separate consistently, it makes your job a lot easier as a quarterback. So maybe you don't have to be, a top 10 NFL quarterback to lead a high-end offense if you put all that cap resources to giving a guy weapons. So I do think that could be the way we see the NFL game going, or see teams decision-making wise go. And maybe even with guys like Geno Smith and Daniel Jones saying, hey, you're great. You're not a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. At that point, I'm not going to put, 20% of my cap towards you just to, ensure that I get average quarterback play. We're seeing that you can probably there's a lot of guys around the NFL right now. There's been so much proliferation of quarterback talent entering the NFL, with passing starting at a younger age, whether it's middle school through high school and into college, where there's a lot of guys that can operate NFL offenses right now that aren't even starters on these teams. So you put the right pieces around him, you can still have success. So I do think that's going to be factoring into the equation for a lot of decision makers around the league.
And one thing, maybe in terms of that kind of proliferation of talent, right, in the draft, and something that I'm just interested in getting your opinion on. It seemed for a long time that cornerbacks coming into the league, it took a little bit of time for them to find their feet. But all of a sudden, over the past couple of years, you've seen, I'm thinking Patrick Surtain, I'm thinking Sauce, Tariq Woolen, JC Horn, Derek Stingley. These guys have come in and contributed immediately. And obviously, Sauce and Surtain are all pro guys. Do you think that is down to maybe some more of the college scheme that we're seeing in the NFL, it's easier for to transition? Or is it that we're just seeing a really talented group that have come in, or is it a little bit of both?
I think it's the reps aspect. Passing has, I said, like early 2000s, mid 2000s, there were a lot of colleges that were passing 15 to 20 times a game, that were these super run heavy, college offenses. Those are the past. You won't find too many outside of like the service academies that are really still grinding other, their oppositions into dust, which means you have 3 cornerbacks on the field at one time. You're getting guys get 50, 60 reps a game against top corners, playing a number of different coverages, because you can't just line up and run static stuff to try to stop the run like they used to in the past, where it's just press every play on the outside. You have to do a lot of different things in college now to stop these high-powered offenses. So I think that's more what it is just you're seeing the reps from these guys at a younger age. And obviously, like I mentioned, into high school, into middle school, that they're getting this technique and getting a ton of reps of it against live other NFL type of competition, more so than ever before.
And maybe, and I know you tweeted this out earlier in January, that there were 3 running backs that went over 1,500 yards. None of them made the playoffs. Saquon is going to be looking for a big payday. Josh Jacobs, after a monster year, is going to be looking for a big payday. Has the way in which the league is going and Zeke's contract meant that they might end up getting less than they would have wanted?
I do think it is. And it's also a product of how many guys are hitting free agency at once. If it was just Saquon in this running back class, he might get paid. He might have 3 people bidding up his numbers. But the fact that it is Saquon and Josh Jacobs and Tony Pollard and Rashad Penny, Kareem Hunt, Miles Sanders, David Montgomery, like if you miss out on Saquon, you have a price ceiling that you're not willing to go above. And then if Saquon wants more than that, someone else bids more than that, fine, let's go get a David Montgomery, because I know he could be a workhorse in my offense too. Now, obviously, it's not the same caliber of player, but the cap is real and you have to make decisions like that. So I do think those guys are kind of going to be maybe a little sore at the numbers getting thrown around because of what you said there. Guys like Zeke Elliott, these second contracts, they just get hurt, they slow down, they're less effective as they get older. just because of the nature of the position. So I do think all those things are factoring in, plus a super strong running back draft class that the numbers on these guys may not get super long-term deals, may not be as gaudy as we've seen in years past.
And we're obviously coming towards the end of January, and we're yet to see any of the head coaching vacancies filled. We know that I think the Colts are doing 7 second-round interviews. The Broncos yet to announce any second-round interviews. For you, do you think that I think there were 9 vacancies open last year, 5 this year. Is that allowing teams to do more due diligence, or is it that the vacancies this year aren't as attractive?
I think it's the latter there. They are not attractive positions. There's not one where you're stepping into saying, like I'm trying to think of last year or just over the years, there's been gigs open up where it's like Justin Herbert, when they fired Anthony Lynn after year 1, it's a job where it's like, hey, I got a franchise quarterback. There's none of that happening at any of these destinations that any of these head coaches can go to. So I do think that's kind of the holdup right now. And I think the other big holdup is that Sean Payton's the big fish out there. Everyone wants Sean Payton. Every owner in the NFL who has a job opening is like, give me the guy who's won a Super Bowl. But that's going to take a trade to happen. So that's going to be the first domino to fall. Everyone's kind of holding their breath saying, can we get Sean Payton? And then after that decision ends up where Sean Payton will go, then everyone else is kind of going to be like, okay, here's now our option. So I do think those are the 2 big things kind of halting or slowing down this process of teams hiring, a new head coach.
And finally, Mike, we've got 2, I think, fantastic championship games to look forward to this weekend. Kind of different teams, obviously different styles in the conferences. But are you leaning towards particular teams making the Super Bowl?
I am a little. I do think that the Cincinnati Bengals is who I'm leaning towards. I know Patrick Mahomes is going to play. The ankle's not a big deal, but it's hard for me to imagine that it's not going to impact at least his mobility and ability to escape. And that's so huge against especially this Bengals defense with all they throw at you in coverage that they've confused Mahomes on multiple occasions. That's why he's 0-3 against him. Lou Anarumo kind of has his number. And a lot of the plays he has made against the Bengals over the years have been outside the pocket or have been those second reaction plays that he's so good at. Taking those away from him, Mahomes is just not Mahomes at that point. So I like the Bengals. And on the other side, I like the 49ers. I just think this defense is so dominant right now. It is so difficult to attack. And obviously, DeMeco Ryan's a big part of that. And he's one of the big fish in the coaching search as well. But this team just has so much talent all around. And Brock Purdy hasn't blinked yet. He's obviously not as good and as talented as someone like a Jalen Hurts, but he has more options. And he has basically unlimited layups in that offense that I do just think that this 49ers team on paper is the best team in football right now outside of the quarterback position.
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating. I mean, when you're talking about the Chiefs as underdogs and this kind of stacked Eagles roster as underdogs as well, it is going to be a late one on this side of the Atlantic, but one that I think is worth staying up for. Mike, I can attest to anyone watching this, you were a fantastic follow on Twitter at PFF_Mike, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to chat to me today.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Great hearing from Mike there, Colin. We had a really good chat with him.
Yeah, super knowledgeable, obviously, from the college game right through to the NFL. And obviously, as an ND alum, he is excited about the game here and wanting to make it over. I think August is going to be fantastic. Look, given the numbers that will come over, given the history that Notre Dame have, and JJ Watt is now retired and a Guinness ambassador. So could we see JJ Watt in Dublin for that game as well?
As Obama, you say yes, we can. So we can get JJ Watt over, hopefully. In the meantime, mention about that Notre Dame Navy game. We're 3 meaningful games of football away from that. We've got 2 championship games and the Super Bowl, and then a big long gap until that kicks off week 0 of the college football season. But we've still great football to come. And next, guys, we're going to turn our attention to having a look at the AFC side of things. So the AFC championship game, I think we've been here before. We have our Cincinnati Bengals versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Back in Kansas City again, Kansas City Chiefs mirroring only the Los Angeles Rams and the New England Patriots to get to their 5th conference final consecutively in a row. That's the same thing. Their 5th consecutive conference final, many of which have been at home, Colin. I want to say, let's talk about all the angles, but let's just start with it. Ankle injury, Patrick Mahomes, beginning and end of discussion, surely.
Well, big part of discussion, but I think it's wider than that. This is the Chiefs' 5th home championship game. They hold a record, and partly, obviously, a big part of that is Patrick Mahomes. The other part is Andy Reid. And we were talking constantly about Kyle Shanahan and the love he gets for Brock Purdy and what he has done there. Andy Reid's genius was on full display last week. Chad Henne comes in, and Chad Henne goes for a franchise record 98 yards down the field and leads them to a touchdown, helped by the fact that the Jaguars seem to ignore the best offensive weapon on the field in Travis Kelce, but nonetheless impressive. Look, with Mahomes' injury, how much will it factor in? I felt that certainly yesterday he's trying to put on a front. You don't want to appear a wounded lion, and so I think deliberately going in without a boot yesterday, deliberately appearing in front of the media and kind of going through warm-ups, but he wasn't doing anything too strenuous. If you watch it, there wasn't a huge amount of weight being put on the ankle. I think it will have to affect him, but if there's anyone who can scheme around that injury, it is Andy Reid. And look, Mahomes is going to play. We know that. I suppose it depends. Is he at 75% or is he at 95%? That could be the difference factor in this.
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes from the season, 32 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Brian, you're calling out Brock Purdy's stats. Mahomes takes it to a new level. And Andy Reid in his 10th conference championship game as a head coach, tied for the second most of all time. Brian, Colin rightly lays out the focus and the areas on the Chiefs a little bit, but it's fair to say we should talk a bit about the Bengals. I mean, they have a new Joe Cool. He was certainly cool last weekend up in Buffalo, both on the field and his general temperature level. But Joe Burrow and what the Bengals have achieved in terms of back-to-back championship games also deserves good recognition.
You'd argue they're the hottest team in the NFL right now throughout the course of the season. Just bear in mind they lost the first 2 games of the season, and then only lost 2 games thereafter in the division to the Ravens and Browns on a Monday night game, which was a bit of an unusual performance. A lot of those factors were down to the fact that Jamar Chase at that stage was out, and he's a big contribution to them in terms of the wide receiver. Nothing phases Burrow anymore. Every time you think this game's going to be too much for him, we saw the Super Bowl last year. Whilst they didn't win, he went out and he had a fantastic performance. And even last weekend, everybody was very high on the Bills. There was a whole narrative around this game potentially being a neutral venue for it, if it was the Bills and the Chiefs, and they came out and they said to everybody, I think you've forgotten about us. We felt we would have beaten the Bills on that Monday night when the game was called off due to the unforeseen circumstances. And they're going in here. They've beaten the Chiefs the last 3 times. They beat them the back end of last season at home. They played each other 3 or 4 weeks later in the championship game. They were down 21-3 in that game. Going into the second half, nothing fazed them. Came back, won in overtime. The game which they played last month, they were losing for 47 minutes of the 60, and yet still found a way to beat the Chiefs again. Right now they have Patrick Mahomes' number. It probably does help again by the fact that he's now injured, and we roll back to Super Bowl 55 when they lost to the Bucs, and it was a similar type of injury. And to what Colin said, all that week leading up to the Super Bowl, he was fine. There was no problem with the injury, but it was very evident come to the game that he wasn't fit. And anybody who watched that game last weekend recognised he's playing severely hampered, and it'd be interesting to see, how dynamic he can be on Sunday. One of Mahomes' key attributes, not so much the throwing, is how he can get away from the pocket, how he's so flexible to get out. His running game is kind of underrated, in my opinion. Will that be there for them on Sunday? Where with Burrow, he can run. He ran for 27 yards last weekend. It's not just about the throwing, but he's a steady man going into it, which will be another wild atmosphere come Sunday night, minus temperatures, but it won't phase him.
You mentioned running there, Brian. Travis Kelce runs quite well with the ball after the catch. He's now up to 1,389 receiving yards in the postseason, tied for 3rd most all time. But running is a really important part of this game when we look at the running backs both sides. Finally, the Chiefs have a semi-decent running game, certainly better than the Bills had. They've got McKinnon, they've got Pacheco there. They've been running hard. They've been relying upon the run a lot more than in seasons gone past. And on the Bengals line column, we look at Joe Mixon, who will definitely run hard, was a key differentiator in many games during the season, especially up in the snow and in Buffalo. It was a threat they had to account for. But how can they run effectively, and we were saying the same last week in this game, behind such a patched up offensive line? They're missing 3 starters. It's almost back to the makeshift offensive lines they were dealing with in the postseason last year when they went to the Super Bowl. So maybe they are able to figure this out. But what do you think about that piece of the game?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably going to be a big factor in terms of, especially for the Chiefs, if Mahomes is injured, in terms of what they can do. Now, Pacheco is a tough runner. His ability to just hit the line and to get yards after contact is significant. Mixon does the same. I called last week, I thought the lack of the line guys would be a real hindrance and that they would suffer. Mixon wouldn't be able to run the ball. That was not the case at all. I think they're facing a much bigger beast this weekend, obviously, but probably more so in the passing game, right? Chris Jones, I think, could be the X factor in this one. Chris Jones' ability, he's had a magnificent season. The Chiefs got away from whatever disastrous idea they had of kind of playing him at edge early last year. If we remember back to that, sort of like the Patriots not naming an offensive coordinator. Sometimes you make silly decisions and then you realize later that no, let's just do the traditional thing. Let's put Chris Jones in the middle, and he's been a wrecking ball for them. Frank Clark comes alive in the postseason, but it is the Bengals. They are playing with a chip on their shoulder, and I think that is making a difference in terms of Mixon, in terms of the running game. They've got a 1-2 punch as well, but for the Chiefs, it is going to be really important for them that they're able to run the ball. But you have a Bengals team as well with DJ Reader. Then talked earlier, I suppose, about Hassan Reddick as a guy who feels that he should have been in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation. DJ Reader feels that he should have been named an All-Pro, and he is playing with a chip on his shoulder, and that is making a huge difference. So I would say that trench warfare, talked about in the first game, it's so important. That's a strength of the other two teams. Maybe we're looking at it in this game, but for different reasons, because it's not such a strength, obviously, with the injuries for the Bengals. But the Chiefs, having learned, Brian talks about the Super Bowl against Tampa, they learned the importance of having a strong O-line. They went and shored it up. Mahomes, they've done a really good job of protecting him. They're going to have to do a really good job of protecting him again on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, Brian, we think about that Bengals defense. You've got, Clark and Jones that Colin alludes to on the Chiefs side, but on the Bengals side, we've got another law firm. We've got Hendrickson and Hubbard who can get pressure on the quarterback. And Kathy Bates did a starring role in Misery, but Jesse Bates in the secondary for the Bengals certainly brings misery to most offenses.
Yeah, he couldn't ring the bell, but there's another bell there playing with Jesse Bates in the second. There's two really strong safeties there. BJ Hill, who was a former Giant, who was kind of cast aside, picked up by the Bengals. Everybody thought his career was coming to an end. He's been really productive over the past few years. As a whole, we're talking about the first game, in terms of the contribution from the Eagles. The overall contribution. Hendrickson last year had 16 sacks. His numbers aren't anywhere close to what he was last year. That was in his first year coming off from the Saints. But collectively as a group, and I don't know if it's because of the mindset we need to focus on Hendricks so much, the other guys are getting at the quarterback. But Mahomes is in for a tough day on Sunday, and if he can't get outside of the pocket because of the ankle situation, I think he's in for a rough day.
Absolutely. Well, look, we're going to throw it out open to the audience here for a couple of questions in a second in relation to the AFC Championship game. Or as I said, anything else they want to bring up and ask us about in relation to things. And we will again come back to our AFC picks in due course, wrapping up the show in terms of who we actually think are going to put money on the line. It's going to win the AFC and it's going to win the NFC Championship games this weekend. But as we pop round the room and the mic's just coming to someone, I shudder to think what we're about to be asked now. No heckling allowed. But, sir, what do you have for us?
All right, I'll try to keep the heckling to a minimum. If the Bengals win this Sunday, what, if anything, does it mean for the Burrow versus Mahomes rivalry?
Well, I'm going to start by saying, don't you have to have both sides win from time to time to call it a rivalry? Because Joe Burrow definitely has the hex over Patrick Mahomes. But that's a great question, guys, because we talk about the excitement of these young quarterbacks in the AFC all the time, and when these two have matched up, we mentioned it, the only time they matched up in the postseason, the only time the Bengals and Chiefs have ever matched up in the postseason was that game last year where Burrow leads his team back from a huge deficit and wins the game. If he does it twice, how does that affect this dynamic and this perception of this dynamic going forward? Is it Brady Manning-esque?
Well, Brady Manning-esque, do you mean Eli Manning beat Tom Brady twice in the Super Bowl?
Should have said Peyton. I should have said Peyton. I should have said
referring to Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's there. I mean, Brian could certainly talk to you about that. Look, I think all the focus is always on the QBs, and but it's much wider than that. I think we talked about Mahomes' injury, but last year's championship game, what was fascinating was I don't think we've ever I have never seen such a Jekyll and Hyde performance. Mahomes came out in that game. He looked unbelievable in that first half. I mean, remember they went for it deliberately at the end because he was playing so well. It felt like they could score at will. And he came out in the second half and he was disastrous. I mean, he performed at a level that Drew Lock used to regularly trot out when he was a Bronco. It was awful. So what was the reason behind that? What was the meltdown? And obviously the Bengals have had his number a little bit. I think partly that is they have been very disciplined. They're rushers. You talked about Hendrickson and Hubbard. They're very they don't blitz him, right? Mahomes is great against the blitz. So they only send four. They send four in different ways, but Hendrickson and Hubbard, they contain. So they don't allow him. Mahomes is amazing when he can get off script and create. When he gets outside and he can find you down the field. I mean, how many times do you hear, don't throw across your body, don't throw across your body? Quarterbacks are supposed to do that. Mahomes does it every single week, and almost every week it works out. It'll play into it. It will be the Peyton Manning versus Tom Brady thing. Quarterbacks get judged on rings. That's how it is. It shouldn't be that way, but undoubtedly that will be the media narrative. But it is much bigger than that. And Patrick Mahomes will be the league MVP. So I don't think it should be on one game, but undoubtedly that's the media narrative is going to be around one game.
I love the question because the last 3 years it's supposed to be in the Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes story, and this was supposed to be the narrative going forward. He had the championship game, the divisional round last year. The Bills beat them in week 5. Everybody was talking about these two playing each other this week. Joe Burrow was back. And the Chiefs are under serious pressure. Mahomes is under serious pressure. This is the 5th year in a row, as you said, Mark, AFC championship game. But they've been to 2 Super Bowls, fair enough. Yeah, they've only won one. When they went to the 4th Super Bowl and they won it, everybody felt this is going to be Mahomes for 4 or 5 years. They were talking about how quickly he can get to Brady's number. Remember all those conversations? That's kind of gone away. Andy Reid and the Chiefs are under pressure. If the Bengals don't win, people will say fantastic season for the Bengals. No one will have any effect on Joe Burrow. They'll just have the same expectations for next season. Where if Mahomes doesn't win, it'll be all about the Super Bowl when the season is over and everybody starts kind of rehashing what's happened throughout the course of the season. I just think it brings more pressure on the Chiefs going to another season where they've expected so much, got to the championship game and haven't won a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I'll just say I think Burrow and the Bengals are playing with house money again. Their run to the Super Bowl last year was unexpected. And even this season, one of the narratives, the sneaky narratives coming out of the Super Bowl last year was people saying, well, yeah, Joe Burrow got to a Super Bowl, but how's he ever going to come back? The Bengals still have a load of stuff to fix. This was a lucky run. Look at Dan Marino. He got to the Super Bowl in his 2nd season. He never got back there. And it was almost this, Burrow might replicate him. I think from going in and getting that great away playoff win in Buffalo and getting back to even this stage, they're going away from home again. They've nothing to lose. It's a bit like last season. They'll roll the dice. He's very cool. And that might be the fundamental difference in relation to it. If I'm putting you on the spot there, though, who would you have? Burrow or Mahomes? Oh, we took the mic away from you, so you could answer.
Mahomes, I think.
There you go. I mean, Colin alludes to it. You're not supposed to throw across your body. You're also not supposed to throw left-handed. You're also supposed to be looking at the wide receiver when you throw the ball to him. There's a lot of crazy things he does, but they just seem to work out. Do we have any other questions there? We got one more coming from the floor as well.
Decide Potter.
Hey, the mic's just fallen out, by the way. This is the beauty of a live show. These things can happen. These things can happen. It's got to be a really good question now.
Hopefully so.
If the Bengals get beat,
Any criticism towards the ownership, kind of in somewhat kind of wasting having like two top players in Burrow and Chase on rookie deals, very much cost controlled, against the kind of the historical reluctance to kind of spend money in free agency?
I'll take that one.
Yeah, it's a great question.
They've got serious problems ahead when Orneos, because T. Higgins is going into his fourth year. He was a second round pick, so there's no fifth year option on him. He's going to look to get paid. They're going to have to pay Jamar Chase. They're going to have to pay Joe Burrow. I'm not going to say they're into kind of last chance of their own quandary in terms of making sure they get over the line and win it this time, but they're going to struggle to keep all the players that will also want to get paid based on their production. T. Higgins has already talked about a potential trade option in the offseason. I do think the time is now. Well, it's a great storyline, and you suggest they're on a bit of a run like last year and no one expects it. They don't see that. You look at the Zach Taylor dressing room celebration last week. You know, it's very clear in that dressing room that they feel they can win this. But if they don't win it now, there will be players moving on.
I will say we've got to give them a bit of credit. You've got to remember the depths at which the Bengals were at after they've brought in these franchise-changing players. They have at least made one Super Bowl, maybe another to come. There are teams equally with talented quarterbacks. Some are now on a second deal already in Josh Allen, Justin Herbert in the Chargers, that haven't got to this promised land. So I don't think they'll be too harsh. And I don't think you can say they've wasted it because they're making the most somewhat of a window. But you're absolutely right. This is a key inflection point this offseason. Quarterbacks now can get their Joe Burrow is now eligible for an extension. Whether they extend him or not is another matter. But until that Hendrickson trade was interesting because, of course, they had another very talented pass rusher they refused to give a second contract to, because the Bengals have this philosophy: you don't get a second contract until the expiry of your first. They're surely going to break that for Joe Burrow. And that's why Hendrickson came in. They had to get someone. They brought him in as a free agent from the Saints when he was up for free agency. But they're surely going to break that for Burrow. And if you break that for Burrow, then you have to break that for Chase and the investments in the O-line, and you start to snowball. So it might be hard to keep it going. But I'll give ownership a little bit of pass as long as they're not cheap now and they lose one of those epoch-defining talents.
I think Herbert is a good example, because Herbert is on that rookie deal. The Chargers went out and actually tried putting pieces around him, but it all fell apart. So, and it's really difficult. I mean, and I think we judge everything off of winning a Super Bowl, winning a ring. And it's so difficult. Like, Andy Reid and the Chiefs are in their 5th straight home championship game. That is absolutely phenomenal. And yeah, they don't have it, but I think Bill Belichick and the Patriots broke people's brains, and they genuinely, like, what they achieved was so unprecedented that it made people think that everyone is going to go and accumulate all these rings. And generally in the history of the league, that doesn't happen. So to me, I do think Burrow has changed it. You've heard the fact that they went out and built an indoor facility, which is something that they hadn't done. I do think they will have to pay him. But I think there is also almost a debate to be had looking at the other side of looking at the NFC with what the Eagles have done with Hurts, and what Kyle Shanahan has done with Brock Purdy. Are we going to see teams move towards the less extravagant contracts for QBs because they're going to draft and develop and bring people in? I think that's something potentially to keep an eye on, right? Because of teams have been so burnt, right? We're going to see what happens with Deshaun Watson and the Browns. We're going to see what happens with Russell Wilson. We're going to see what happens with Dak. But those are contracts that right now, Kyler Murray's another one, look like an albatross around those franchises' neck. So I think you're going to get NFL teams that are going to say, let's just get a rookie in, and let's have the head coach and in place, and let's build around on a rookie contract, rather than, unless you've got an absolute superstar, then you will pay. But unless they're a superstar, I think you might see more churn in QBs in the league over the next decade or so.
Sorry. Great stuff. Thanks very much for the questions. We're going to take a short break here because we're going to move to another segment. It will be remiss of us, as we're in a facility with very intelligent people who can tell us all about the betting markets, if we didn't at least have a look at some of the betting trends and markets going into the two games this weekend, but also considering all of the moves and shakes that came out of the divisional round and some of the fun and games that came from there. So we're going to very shortly be joined by Stephen Quigley of Pointsbet to just talk us through some of the trends that we're seeing for the weekend, and then we'll move on to our picks and, of course, final interview as well. As I said, we're being joined now by a senior sports trader here at Pointsbet, Stephen Quigley, who's a popular man in the room here. I wasn't prompted at all, Stephen.
No, yeah. Nor paid.
Nor paid. No, the fivers are going to be passed around afterwards. Stephen, you follow the betting markets and obviously the NFL super closely. I mean, first of all, let's just take a little bit look back at the divisional weekend. What did you see in terms of interesting trends and things that came out of there that piqued your interest?
I think it's very interesting indeed. I think there's a few bits I'd say. I think maybe discussed it earlier on this. I think of the 14 this week, the Eagles were not probably most impressive in their game. I think they were particularly. I think there's kind of some doubts after the performance against the Saints beforehand. I think they kind of answered those doubts in a big way. For betting companies, the Bengals win was a great result. Like, I think the Bills obviously have their own rabid following, as we all know very well, and I think the Jamar Hamlin story has probably brought even neutrals on their side.
Yeah.
So I think for us, they're the big kind of takeaways from it. But I think the Eagles were very impressive. I think if you looked at this game a few weeks ago, it would have been kind of a pick 'em game, or even the 49ers been slight favourites in Philadelphia, which may be hard to believe for some of you, but I think the Eagles' performance was that impressive.
Well, Brian was delighted to see that impressive.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm still getting over it. Yeah, we're just looking ahead to this weekend, Stephen. In particular, the Bengals one. I'm going to start with the Bengals because when the line started on Sunday evening, the Chiefs were -3, and it kind of gradually came down to -1.5, and then it's flipped. It's flipped to the Bengals. It's now flipped back to the Chiefs. Is it the Mahomes factor, or is it just a case where the money's going? No one can make a decision where to put the money.
It's so difficult to do. I think to try and give an idea is that if this is a regular season game and we had doubts on Mahomes, he'd be rested. We know he's not playing, but it's so hard to kind of ascertain kind of where he is. I think everyone will think, oh, betting operators have the inside scoop on injuries, but it's not. We're just like you, just like me, just like you guys as well. We're looking at kind of the same journalists on Twitter as you are to find out on injuries. And as you've described earlier, there is a bit of kind of double crossing here from from Reid and the Chiefs. Now they're talking they're very bullish in how conditioned he is, but we have to have real concerns. So it's really difficult. I think there is kind of always the knowns, the unknowns. That people talk about kind of home field advantage, which is there, but that's very much built into the pricing of a match. Like we know we know who's at home. We don't know the condition of Patrick Mahomes' lower leg.
So you touched on home field advantage. Obviously, the Eagles have the home field advantage in the NFC game. Are you surprised that the line is as low as it is?
I was personally a little surprised, and it kind of did move to the Eagles by a point very soon after the lines went up. So I think it may move further to the Eagles, but you have to remember you're up against like the best offensive play caller in many years in Shanahan. You have like Purdy's been very impressive. He's lined up with some of the best kind of receivers that you could possibly have, like after the catch there.
Yeah,
fantastic set up. I think it's the hardest game to call of the two. I really struggle to call that game personally.
The NFC game.
Yeah, I struggle with that. I do think the Chiefs will do it right, but I can't make a pick on that second game on the Niners. Yeah, I struggle.
And I don't want to put you too much on the spot, Stephen, but you mentioned about just bring it back to the Mahomes injury situation. I mean, how much would the line move if they said, look, it's going to be Henny given Sunday, just like it was last year when he came in the middle of the game?
It's a great question. I think the Bengals would be kind of 4.5 to 5 point favourites. In that case, if we knew it was going to be Chad Henne from the start and Mahomes wasn't dressing for the game, at least. But now look, again, Reid is a superb play caller. He can protect him. Similar as well, it's kind of set up to succeed. You have probably the best kind of short target in Kelsey that you could imagine, and I think but I still think they'd struggle with Henny, and it will be a magnificent effort. There's also quite a fair question is that if the Chiefs were to win and Mahomes is given 2 weeks recovery after the game, he'll arrive at the Super Bowl in top condition, and what will that mean to the betting markets as well? That's probably a question that none of us have truly understood or answered yet.
Yeah. I do remember Tom Brady in a walking boot before a certain Super Bowl that Brian remembers very well, and people were agog. So yeah, it can happen.
People get burnt on, excuse me, money wise and handicaps in terms of the betting front. Prop bets have become even more popular over the course of the last 12 months. You don't necessarily have to bet on the result of the game. It's more totals or touchdown scores. Is there anything interesting trends that whether it was last weekend or leading into this weekend that you've noticed?
I think what I saw personally, and I found very interesting from the Cowboys 49ers last week, was just how well the kind of Cowboys kind of shut down, let's just say the key two was like McCaffrey and Samuel in particular, and just how again, to shut down those two is hard work. To shut down Ayuk and Kittle as well is borderline impossible, but there was a great job done of it. And really, I think you may see kind of, let's say maybe not the lesser players, the wrong word, but the lesser different targets can play. Like Kittle's been fantastic. I think it was he's 7 for 7 in terms of targets to catch the playoffs. Mitchell is quite kind of very good as well as a great kind of target at the back as well. So part of me does like the kind of Kittle over yards and kind of Kittle over receptions. I just think kind of he works really well as Purdy's kind of safe option.
The first half of the season, Kittle was more a blocking tight end. He's obviously gone back to what we're used to seeing over the course of his career, but the bookmaker was obviously catching on to that, and they were bringing his total number quite down in terms of yards. But everybody who's been on Kittle recently has been on the right side of a winning bet.
Well, especially if he does a bit more of his juggling, like he did for the catch against the Cowboys, that can always help. Stephen, we've been fortunate enough to be joined by a couple of the team here in Pointsbet through the season, talking about their areas of expertise in terms of building the betting models, the quants elements in relation to what goes in behind the market. But from your perspective, I mean, and look, shout out to Pointsbet and the lightning bets aspect you have for in-play betting, obviously not in Ireland, but in the US where you're trading. What do you see in terms of that betting landscape in the NFL and how that's evolving and indeed increasing year by year?
Yeah, I think it's one we have to probably split into two parts, given that a lot of our audience are obviously based over here in Ireland and have to fight off sleep most Sunday nights. I think we'll start on the US side. It's probably, it's ever increasing. It's the kind of overturning of the rules prohibiting kind of gambling as such. The market maker, and again, the demand for markets, the demand for these kind of markets, or even, let's say, like lightning bets or kind of same game parlays, like this demand is being fueled from the US. Like Americans who've kind of grown up on fantasy sports want to be able to bet on these kind of markets. So the offering before in maybe England and Ireland was limited in comparison, and the demand has grown for the US. Like you have the instance now where, for many kind of companies who were kind of formed in the UK maybe are over in the US now, the Super Bowl was once the kind of a large event on a Sunday, but now it's the biggest betting event of the year for them as well, even with any presence in the US, given the demand for kind of NFL betting in the US. For us over here in Ireland, it's a bit different. You see differences. So I previously worked at a certain other Irish bookmaking operator who doesn't need any introduction on Pointsbet content, but you'll see kind of higher volume during the 6 o'clock the red zone games, we almost call them. So the early 1 o'clock kickoffs in the US, there's more demand. People are falling asleep, particularly by Sunday night football. So you actually see kind of fall offs in turnover, whereas in the US it's the other way around. Like Monday night football is our biggest game typically in terms of betting volume and customers betting on it. And yeah, I think it was, as I look at this there's probably a great story we have from years ago. So for you guys, remember back to Super Bowl 48, if you bring your minds back to the Broncos against the Seahawks.
Oh yes.
Colin would enjoy that one entirely.
Yeah, we've a great story here. So when I worked for the other unnamed operator, around that time there was a meme going around on social media around The Simpsons predicting kind of the score in the Super Bowl, and the score they predicted was kind of the Denver to win 19-14. So obviously to score 19 points, you need to have either missed extra points or safeties, or it's a tough score to get to. So there was a demand from our team to can we offer some betting? So yes, of course we can. We put a price on it. I think it was 100-1 for a 19-14 scoreline. And at the time, within like 2 minutes, it was our biggest loser across the whole event. Within 10 minutes, our biggest loser across any selection for the entire month. And by an hour, we had to kind of remove betting from it because we just couldn't ascertain what we could do with it if this actually happened. We couldn't really talk to our business to say we're going to lose a few million if this finishes in 1914 because of a Simpsons joke from 2005. So we had challenges around that. But yeah, I think the move now, just how big is in the US, that you'll see kind of the money's waged on the Super Bowl are now into a different stratosphere, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And as more and more states open up, we'll continue to see this trend continue.
I'm just wondering in terms of trends right now, leading into the weekend, is there anyone, I wouldn't call it a long-term view, but it's 2 games. The reality is you win 2 games now, you're a Super Bowl champion. I wonder is there any people, sort of trend there for people plunging into a bet now of who the FCC is going to win it outright, rather than taking the line on Sunday, taking the money line or the handicap and saying, right, there's a better opportunity here. I think they're all in the region of 3-1, 11-4. Is there someone out there that's people they're keen to have right now?
Yeah, it's certainly very popular. I think really what you kind of find with these kind of future markets is that they might kind of look at the team who says, well, if that team wins, how much will that price be affected by winning? So really the Bengals, who are the longest price of the 4, and the impact of winning in Kansas and kind of back to Super Bowl for the second year, assuming kind of Burrow kind of does his stuff in the playoffs, like of the 4 teams that's the most popular. Now, at the same time, they're probably one we're probably keenest to take on. We don't know if they can actually do it twice. So I think the strength of the 2 teams in the Eagles 49ers is such that my belief is the winner comes from that game personally.
The NFC game.
I do believe so, yeah.
And we're going to bring in our final guest in a second. But Stephen, before we let you go, going to put you on the spot. We haven't given our picks yet, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Give us the winner, in your mind, not necessarily the betting line, but in your mind, of the NFC Championship game and the AFC Championship game this weekend.
The hard one is the Chiefs Eagles. I think the Eagles.
So the Eagles in the NFC, and on the AFC side, you think the Chiefs?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so it would be a good Super Bowl if that comes out.
Fantastic. Look, I think it'd be great. I think no matter what kind of pairing we get in the final, it's going to be probably the closest kind of final in terms of betting kind of for a number of years. So I think you have 4, as you said. Do we have the 4 best teams here? Buffalo may have a small argument, but I think we probably do. I think kind of last week kind of showed that fact as well. So look, I think it's the best kind of pairing for the 2 conference finals in many years. So I can't think of a better one in the last 10 personally.
Got it. Yeah, well, I mean, and look, you can always have interesting prop bets like in Super Bowl 48 for the first score to be a safety, and then for the other team to score another 41 points after that safety as well, as Colin well knows. We've been very fortunate with some of the great guests we've had on from the Pointsbet team here in Dublin during the season. I'd like to thank Stephen, but also all the other guys that joined us earlier on in the year. And if you're interested in getting into sports trading, dealing with the quantification side of things, dealing on the engineering side of things, or indeed just interested in great customer experience, do check out their open roles. They're hiring now in Dublin, around Ireland, but especially in Dublin for their Dublin 8 office. Check them out, www.pointsbet.ie. Stephen, thanks again for that. We'll see if Brian and Colin agree with your picks in short course. But now we're going to move on to interviewing our final guest of this evening, talk a bit about the AFC, NFC, and get a few questions from the audience. You'll notice I'm not getting questions from the audience for Stephen because I think they might abuse him a little bit. I'm trying to protect him in that regard. Okay, so we'll just break now and come on with our special guest next. So we're going to now move on to our final guest, former NFL player, media expert, and indeed a Pointsbet ambassador, Ryan Leaf. Ryan, we've had you on the Irish NFL show before, but it's a pleasure to be talking to you again this evening.
It's been great to be a part of Pointsbet, and of course to get to talk to you guys again. I love what you're all doing, and I mean it's been a great year. It's been a great year for me and my family. This new opportunity, and I kind of got to dive my throw my hat into the ring around the sports betting aspect of things. Didn't think I'd be so darn good at it, but I am. It's awesome.
Well, you're better than most. And Brian, tell us a little bit about that, because part of your collaboration with Pointsbet, you've been doing this show, the Straight Line Show. We're interested, how have your predictions gone? What are you planning for the last few games? How have you learned yet never, ever, ever bet on the Cowboys, on the Vikings, and on the Chargers? Has that gone right?
Well, it depends, when you talk about point spreads and totals, you do different things. All right, so let's put it this way. So I bet on every single NFL, or at least I picked. I don't bet, I just play one on TV. But I have picked every game this year, okay? And I am 156 and 124 and 7. So that's pretty darn good. That's 32 games over 500 in my inaugural season. So if you followed me, if you trailed me this year, you're having a pretty good 2023 so far to start it all off. I had the Bengals last week. I was really thought they were the best team in the AFC, and I went against the Cowboys like you're supposed to in that game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I lost my shirt on that one. So I'm learning the ropes. The show is great. I got great producers. We have great guests. We're starting to get a good following. I think I was meant to do my own show in this form, to have the platform to do it. And we've had a heck of a year. And I really, I'm incredibly grateful to PointsBet for them giving me the opportunity to do something like this and excel in it.
Ryan, not surprised to see you excel in kind of everything you do. We've seen you fill in for Rich Eisen and be absolutely phenomenal in covering that. But interested, obviously, we got the championship games coming up, and the AFC is the pretty boys in terms of the QBs, but I'm interested in the NFC, because obviously you got Brock Purdy there, who's come in QB3 and is leading the 49ers under Kyle Shanahan's tutelage. And then you got Jalen Hurts, who had a really kind of interesting college career in terms of what he had to do, going, switching it up, and then coming in the second round. A lot of doubts around him. But in his 2 years as starter, he's led the Eagles into the playoffs, and obviously has a home championship game. What are your thoughts on the NFC matchup on Sunday?
This is a great game because these defenses are incredibly good. I thought more offense was going to be generated between the Cowboys and the 49ers, and the defenses really showed up. So I think something similar could take place in this game, where both defenses show up. And then, unfortunately for 49ers fans out there, Jalen Hurts right now is just a better quarterback. Not because of the things he does necessarily, but just the amount of time he's had on the football field. And this team is just playing at an incredibly high level. It's at home. That place is going crazy. Brock Purdy is as good as he's been all year long. I just feel like the Eagles are the better team, and they're destined to get back to the Super Bowl. So if I was making my pick right now, I'd be rolling with the Eagles at this moment. I think the defense for the 49ers are going to be great. I wouldn't surprise me if the 49ers found a way to get it done on the road. The fact that they have to go on the road and play in Philadelphia, the fact that they've had to play one more game, how well the Eagles play, the differential in talent that we saw a week ago between the Giants and the Eagles, make me believe that Jalen Hurts, who I think probably before getting injured had a real chance at winning the MVP earlier this year, has an exceptional game, gets his team and gets Philadelphia back to the Super Bowl for the first time in a few years.
Ryan, I mentioned that you're very confident on the Bengals in the divisional round last weekend, so I have a feeling I know where you're going to go in terms of the AFC Championship game. Having been a quarterback in the league, how decisive is this Patrick Mahomes situation? Because if you think back, and we spoke about it earlier in the show, to Super Bowl 55, where he had the injury similar going into that game, and the Chiefs tried to play it down, and again this week they're trying to make it out that he's fully fit and there's no kind of drop off from last weekend. But like, the Bengals are such a chip on their shoulder. Does it really matter how fit Mahomes is? If they feel this is a time for them, they seem to have the number over the Chiefs, having beaten them the past 3 times.
Yeah, they beat them 3 in a row. Burrow's got his number for sure. And I don't mean Patrick Mahomes. I mean Steve Spagnuolo. They got Spags' number. This is what the Bengals have right now, defensive coordinator for the Chiefs. A high ankle sprain is incredibly difficult to come back from. And I do believe that he can be ready to go this weekend, where there won't be much of a limp, there won't be much of anything going on. But what's going to happen? It's going to get, it's going to get exacerbated at some time during the game. He's going to get pulled down. It's going to get stretched. It's going to get bent a little bit different, where the tape starts to loosen up, and it's going to become a problem. It just is. It's going to be a problem for him to move around in the same way that he has. And what makes him such a difference maker is his ability to move around the pocket, outside the pocket, especially on third down, to pick up some of those third downs when guys can't get open when they're dropping 8 guys back there. So it's going to be a factor. It is. Even without the injury, which hasn't been the case when they've played the Bengals over the last 3 times, Joe Burrow and this offense has been able to get it done, and the defense has as well. So I just think the confidence is there. This team is playing incredibly well, and Joe Burrow's just a giant killer. Again, this game is just as exciting as the other. Wouldn't surprise me at all if Kansas City found a way to get it done and get the win and get back to the Super Bowl. 5th consecutive AFC championship being held at Arrowhead with Patrick Mahomes as a starting quarterback. I just think the Bengals are the better team at the moment. I think they get to the Super Bowl, and I think that makes for an incredible matchup between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll see, and that's what it is today. I don't do my show until tomorrow afternoon. So we'll see what my actual picks will be when I get in the studio.
Good man, Ryan. A good little plug there for the Straight Line show. And if you want these real picks, you're going to have to wait for that moment in time. You mentioned, obviously, about Mahomes. And yes, 5 consecutive AFC Championship games at home, but only 1-1 in Super Bowls. And Andy Reid obviously hasn't got the greatest record in conference championships. I'm kind of interested in your views, Ryan. We're talking about the teams that have got there. But let's reflect a little bit on the teams that didn't get here, like the divisional round games. We've got the Jags, and to an extent you could say the Giants were happy to be there, albeit they went out in very different circumstances. The Bills, yet again, not yet far enough, and it's kind of like, is this Josh Allen era ever going to take flight? But also the Cowboys now, the divisional round hump, it's going to extend to 28 long years since they've been in the conference championship. How do you interpret the way forward for those teams? And what was your takeaway or any glimmers of hope that they could take from obviously their disappointing losses last weekend?
Well, the way the Giants in year 1 under Brian Dable and how they've improved reminds me a lot of the Eagles team from last year, where they made the playoffs. They got embarrassed by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the wild card round. They went back to work. They added some talent around Jalen Hurts on the defensive side of the football, and they've been world beaters this year, right? That's very much something that the Giants could do and use as the experience. They even have a wild card win in their belt, having gone on the road and beat the Minnesota Vikings this year. So you got to have some real optimism for the Giants. As for the Bills, interesting, of course, because there is a window. There is a window to win a championship. That's just plain and simple. You look at the Atlanta Falcons and what they were able to do and get to that championship with Dan Quinn and not get it done, and that window closed really, really quickly for them. I don't think that's the case with the Buffalo Bills with Josh Allen. I do think that the emotional up and down of the experience around Damar Hamlin just finally caught up to them. I mean, I felt like there was that proverbial wall that they hit in both the games against the Patriots as well as the Dolphins, but they were the Pats and the Finns. They weren't the Bengals, right? Josh Allen could throw him on his back and carry him in those 2 games. He just couldn't do that. And the team was just emotionally drained. It had to have been. Their central nervous system had to have been on tilt for 3 consecutive weeks. And at this level, you just can't win at a sustained level that way. You can't do it. And unfortunately, that incident did happen. Fortunately, Damar Hamlin is healthy and safe and here with us all. And now the team can address some of the issues. Injuries was a huge factor. Losing Von Miller was a huge deal after signing him in the offseason. And then they need to probably add another offensive lineman or build up that offensive line a little bit more so they are not as responsible on Josh Allen to run the football in games where they have to come back from. Like, they only rushed the ball 12 times in that game against Cincinnati, and they did it a lot from shotgun with no success. And so, that's a team there. As for the Dallas Cowboys, I mean, I don't know what to think about them. I have no faith in that program ever getting to a championship level. I just don't. And it's because of the leadership. It's because of Mike McCarthy, I think, and I really do believe it's because of the Joneses. You know, they've been in this business for as long as you can imagine. Jimmy Johnson really had his fingerprint on the championships, and when Jerry Jones got rid of him and started taking things on himself, they just haven't had the success. They just haven't. You could still own the team and hire somebody who does it for a living, who's done it for a living for the whole life, in those positions, and not your sons and not yourself. You can do that. And then I think until he does do that, I think this team's going to have a real problem winning the championship. I just do. It's. I don't think I'm going out on a limb making that statement.
Ryan, the first domino has fallen in the head coach search with Frank Reich now being appointed in Carolina. Got to feel a little bit for Steve Wilkes, who came in there as the interim, had to go through 3 QBs, had his best player traded away, still won more games than Cliff Kingsbury, who replaced him in Arizona. But I suppose interested in your thoughts on Frank Reich, a guy who had success obviously with the Eagles, but when he was in Indianapolis, he had a new QB almost every season. It did obviously really fell off a cliff this year, but can they have success? You were talking about the Cowboys and the Joneses. Tepper seems to be very eager for success. Can Frank Reich bring that to Carolina?
I think Frank Reich's a heck of a football coach. You know, it always depends on what the quarterback issue is. You know, he's had to use different ones every single year in Indianapolis, right? It was mixing and matching. You need to build something. You need to have something. And I think people just think that's easy for Frank Reich because he was able to do it with Nick Foles, right? But don't forget, he wasn't the one calling the plays. That was Doug Peterson. Right? He was calling the plays at the time. So it's different when you're the head coach and you're the one deciding what plays you're going to call. What's the quarterback situation going to be like in Carolina? That's the bigger question in all of this, you know. Impressive what Steve Wilkes was able to get done. Ultimately, they couldn't beat the Bucks, who were bad, to win the division. That division was incredibly bad. So we'll see. Offensive-minded head coaches, you know, get many opportunities because this league's about offenses, period. And so we'll see. I think Carolina is going to be I think it's going to be a tough place to win, unfortunately, regardless of who you have in there calling the plays and calling the shots.
Ryan, we want to be respectful here of your time, but also, obviously, this is an opportunity for the Pointsbet team here in Dublin, because we're here live with them this evening to kind of pose some questions and kind of engage with you as well. And obviously, with your connection with Pointsbet during the year, we want to just open up the floor if we can get a mic out there for anybody, for any questions that they might have live here for you. Be warned, questions about, you know, the secret of the universe and things like that may come up. They're a rowdy bunch. But let's just get a mic out there and see if anyone's got any questions.
Isn't that the secret of the universe?
For 42 from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I think it was, before. We got one here from Stephen.
Hi, Ryan. 2 questions in one, if you don't mind. I think firstly, of the 4 teams this week, which team would you love to have been the quarterback for most in terms of how the kind of the play callers and the kind of setups and obviously the receiving talent on show? And secondly, if in the morning Mr. Rogers gave you a phone call and said, which team should I join next season, who would you suggest Aaron moves to?
Okay, I had a little hard time hearing you there through that microphone, but I think you wanted to know really about the play callers this weekend and the success. I think
I'll just call it out again, Ryan. It was who would you like to be playing for out of the 4 teams this weekend in relation to it. The follow-on was, if Aaron Rodgers gave you a call, who would you tell him to go to? Which is a great one.
I would like to be a receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals because I want to play with Joe Burrow. I think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? Like if him and I could go away to sleepaway camp this summer, I'd do it in a second with Joe Burrow. So since Aaron Rodgers can't go there, it's none of these spots for these final 4 teams, of course, are available for anybody. Aaron Rodgers' situation, I think his best situation's in Green Bay. If he wants to, the team has said they want him back, right? So if they want him back, I think his best chance to win a championship is in Green Bay. I think you add to it defensively. I think his age and where we're at had a lot to do with his production this season. Not so much of everybody else's around him, but finally it had something to do with Aaron Rodgers' production. So we'll see. I right now I just want to be around Joe Burrow in that offense because it's like a well-oiled machine, everybody. It's so fun to watch.
Well, we know where your preference lies. I'm looking around to see if anybody else is... They're all gone very shy now, Ryan. They've all gone very shy. We've got one more question coming from the audience. We got the mic over. One sec.
Hi, Ryan. If you were a wide receiver for Joe Burrow, would he ever throw you the ball?
Well, yeah, I'm incredibly athletic. Okay, so I'm fast, I'm agile, and he throws it to everybody, right? Like, he does not discriminate at all. If you're open and you're in the progression of what the defense provides, he's going to throw you the football. We've seen games where Jamar Chase has just been shut down. And who has a huge game? T. Higgins goes over 200 plus yards. You know, Tyler Boyd has a big game. You know, you have Irwin, who has really made an impact this year for this football team. Number 16. It's been so fun to watch him spin around. And yeah. So if I was on that roster and I somehow found a way to get out on the field, you know, maybe as a tight end or something like that, I'm sure he would find me if I was open.
Oh, Ryan, you're saying you're incredibly athletic. I seem to remember a tweet you put out a couple of years ago about Tom Brady starting a playoff game at 45 years of age, and that you were a similar age and did your ACL just getting out of bed or something.
21-year-old me would run circles around pretty much everybody in this world in terms of athleticism.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, look, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you. We greatly appreciate your thoughts and insights in relation to the game. Again, just to call out, great collaboration you've had with Pointsbet during the year and your show, The Straight Line, which people can catch, and they're going to have to tune in now very shortly to get your picks, obviously, on the AFC or the NFC games, but we think we got a little bit of an insight in relation to it.
I got a pretty good insight. It's where I'm heading. All my PointsBet peeps out there, keep doing what you're doing. It's an absolute pleasure working with you, being one of your peers, getting to do this. You know, it's a dream job to be able to do it and be a part of this team and this business. It's the future, and grateful to be a part of it. Keep doing what you're doing over there.
Ryan, thanks for everyone here in Dublin. So really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Okay, so great to hear from Ryan there and for him to join us. So brilliant. And obviously from Mike Remmer earlier in the show as well. We're going to wrap things up here in Dublin tonight, and we've got one last piece of business. We put poor Stephen on the spot on his pick. Ryan's given a bit of his insight on his picks for the game. But gentlemen, we wouldn't be doing the Irish NFL show if we didn't give out absolutely awful picks for the AFC and NFC Championship game. I won again just on the picks, just for the benefit of everyone to remember. But we're going to start with the two of you getting it wrong. Who is going to win the two games this week? Couple of words, just really quickly. That's really simple. We talked enough about them.
Just need listeners to listen back to some of Mark's picks for MVP, Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year. Certainly he gets the games right, but when it comes into making the player picks, you know, there's a little bit to be desired.
Yeah. Get to the games.
My season pick way back in August when we did this for the Super Bowl was the Eagles and the Bills. I'm not going to go away from the Eagles now. I think that they have an amazing roster. I think Hassan Reddick is playing with his hair on fire, and I think having Lane Johnson back and Jalen Hurts, even if his shoulder isn't 100%, will be enough in a very close and tough battle against the 49ers. On the other side, you can make... I mean, look, Brian said it at the start. This is the best four teams. You can make an argument for any one of them. But I'm going to say, because of Mahomes' injury, and Stephen talked about it, and we've talked about it, I don't think Mahomes' injury is right. I think they're playing it up, that he's fitter than he is. And I'm going to say Trey Hendrickson is going to get to him, and Joe Burrow is going to enjoy another afternoon at Arrowhead, or Burrowhead as they're now calling it.
Burrowhead. I love it.
It's going to be the Bengals.
I'm so glad I asked you to be brief. That was great. Thank you very much, Colin. Brian, who you got?
You're only as good as your last game. I'm 10 for 10 in the playoffs on picks, Mark, so
That's true.
quite lagging behind on that situation. In the first game, I'd be really confident on the Eagles. I just think, I'm not going to say go as far as to say it's a blowout, but I think it'll be a very dominant performance by the Eagles, both offensively and defensively. I think they win the game quite comfortably. On the other game, this one really is a very difficult one. If Mahomes was fully fit, I'd be very keen on the Chiefs. I can see the storylines as to why Burrow comes back. The Chiefs played in week 1 in Arizona. They wiped the floor of the Cardinals. At the Super Bowl's in Arizona. They'll finish the season in Arizona. The Chiefs and Eagles to play in the Super Bowl.
Okay, well, as I now own a number 23 Christian McCaffrey jersey and was in San Francisco last week, I feel like I have to represent for the 49ers. It will be a tough sled, and they are definitely the underdog, but I'm just going to ride with the 49ers. They were my Super Bowl pick from the NFC at the start of the season, so like you a bit with the Eagles, I'm sticking with where I was at the start of the season. And on the AFC, it's a little bit, who knows. I still worry about that Bengals offensive line and how porous it might be. But the Mahomes injury does worry. And yeah, I'll go with the Bengals. Don't feel overly confident about it. But is that us unanimous on the Bengals?
No.
No, okay, that's all right. I'm just checking. When we're unanimous, it's generally a curse. So that's good for any Bengals fans out there. So look, they're the picks for the game. Obviously, great to hear from Mike Renner. Great to hear from Ryan Leaf. Great to enjoy today and tonight with the crew here at Pointsbet in Dublin. Big thank you to Graham Ross and all the Pointsbet team for facilitating this and setting us all up. The guys will be on the road in 2 weeks' time in Arizona, and so we'll be breaking down, obviously, the Super Bowl very differently. But we'll be back on Monday night giving you all the reaction, good, bad, or indifferent to the 2 key championship games, and look forward to talking to you then. For now, it's good night from all of us. Huge thanks to PointsBet and all the guys here.